Maya had always known that school wasn't going to be easy. Living in a small suburban town, she often found herself one of the few black students in her class. It wasn't something that bothered her at first, but over time she began to notice the subtle and not so subtle ways that some of her classmates treated her differently. It wasn't the sort of thing that anyone would say out loud, but Maya could feel it. She felt it in the way her classmates looked at her when they thought she wasn't paying attention. She felt it in the whispers that followed her down the hall. She felt it in the teasing that started with innocent jokes and quickly turned into something more hurtful. At first, Maya tried to ignore it. She was determined to focus on her studies and make her mom proud. Her mom always told her that education was the key to a better future, and Maya took those words to heart. Every day she tried her best to ignore the whispers and keep her head down. But that wasn't always easy, especially when the whispers came from Chloe and her group of friends. Chloe was popular, and for some reason Maya had become her target. Chloe didn't say anything outright, but the way she and her friends would glance at Maya made it clear that they saw her as different, something to be made fun of. At lunch, they would gather around their table and laugh, their voices loud and full of confidence, as if they were sure no one else could hear their cruel jokes. They'd call Maya things like charcoal, sneering as they said it. It was a name that seemed to amuse them, but for Maya, it was a constant reminder of how different she was. It wasn't just Chloe. The others, too, would join in. Maya had learned to keep her gaze focused on her food or her book, anything to avoid their eyes. They were always there, lurking just outside her field of vision, waiting for an opportunity to say something that would make her feel small. At first, it was just a few jabs here and there. "Hey, Charcoal, what are you eating today? I bet it's something spicy, right?" The girls would laugh as though they were telling a joke, and Maya, not wanting to cause a scene, would just smile awkwardly and continue eating. She learned early on that laughing it off was the safest option. It was easier than confronting them or getting upset. But even though Maya tried to keep calm, their words stung every time. The bullying continued, and each day felt like a new challenge. Sometimes it was a whisper in the hallway. Sometimes a comment made just loud enough for her to hear. Maya didn't understand why they had to treat her this way. What had she done to deserve it? She was just trying to get through her day, the same as everyone else. But no matter how hard she tried to ignore them, the words still hurt. There was one particular day during gym class that stuck out in her mind. The teacher had asked everyone to gather in a circle on the floor for a quick discussion before starting their exercises. Maya sat down in the circle, trying her best to stay unnoticed. But of course, Chloe and her friends found a way to make her the center of attention. "Look at Maya," Chloe said loud enough for the whole group to hear. "I bet she doesn't even know how to do this. Probably doesn't even want to break a sweat." Chloe's voice dripped with mockery, and the girls around her snickered. Maya felt her cheeks flush. She tried to pretend that the comment didn't bother her, but inside it hurt more than she was willing to admit. She could hear the laughter of the other students, and for a brief moment, she wondered if anyone would ever stick up for her. But no one did. No one ever did. After that day, it seemed like the bullying only got worse. Chloe and her friends started to make a game out of teasing Maya. They would follow her down the hall, pretending to accidentally bump into her. They'd giggle and call her names, making sure that they were loud enough for everyone around to hear. At lunch, they'd gather around her table, making snide comments about how she was always sitting alone. Sometimes they'd throw little insults like, "I wonder how you manage to keep your hair so messy all the time," or, "Do you think that dress really looks good on you?" Maya didn't know what to do. She had tried talking to her mom about it, but her mom would always tell her the same thing. "People are cruel sometimes, Maya, but that doesn't define you. You have to be strong and know who you are." Maya knew her mom meant well, but it didn't make the bullying any easier to bear. She tried to live up to her mom's advice, but some days it felt impossible. As the days turned into weeks, Maya started to feel more and more isolated. She stopped sitting with her usual friends at lunch, choosing instead to sit alone in the corner. She'd bury her nose in her books, hoping that her classmates would leave her alone, but it didn't help. No matter where she went, Chloe and her group would find her. They'd make their jokes, and she'd smile weakly, trying to keep the tears from welling up in her eyes. One day, after yet another incident in the lunchroom, Maya finally broke down. She had been sitting quietly at her table, trying to ignore the laughter from Chloe's group when one of the girls, whose name Maya didn't even care to remember, had turned to her with a look of smug satisfaction. "What's wrong, Maya?" The girl had sneered. "Are you sad because nobody wants to sit with you? It must be so lonely being charcoal." The words hit Maya like a slap in the face, and for the first time in weeks she couldn't keep it in. She stood up abruptly, knocking her chair to the ground. She rushed out of the lunchroom, her heart pounding in her chest, and didn't stop running until she was outside the school. Maya found herself sitting alone on a bench in the schoolyard, tears streaming down her face. She felt embarrassed for breaking down in front of everyone, but at that moment she didn't care. She didn't know how much longer she could take this. The bullying had gone on long enough, and the words that were meant to hurt her were doing exactly that. It was as though every cruel word from Chloe and her friends was carving away at her confidence piece by piece. As she sat there trying to compose herself, Maya thought about what her mom had said. "People are cruel sometimes, but that doesn't define you." But Maya didn't feel strong. She didn't feel like she knew who she was anymore. She felt like a shadow of the girl who had first walked into school full of hope and excitement, and she didn't know if she could keep going like this. Maya didn't know what to do, but she knew one thing for sure. Something had to change. She couldn't keep letting the bullies control her life. She didn't know how she would stand up to them, but she knew that she would. She would find a way. With that thought, Maya wiped the tears from her eyes, stood up, and took a deep breath. It was time to take control back. The days following Maya's breakdown felt heavier than usual. School was no longer just a place to learn. It had become a battleground. But this time the battle wasn't with her classmates, it was with herself. She had always been taught to be strong, to brush off the hurtful comments, but that day in the lunchroom had changed something in her. She couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't. The pain was too real, and the tears that had slipped down her cheeks had marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Maya wasn't sure how to move forward, but she knew she couldn't go on like this. The bullying had been going on for so long now, and no matter how many times she tried to ignore it, it kept coming back. She had been quiet for so long, hoping that if she just kept her head down, things would get better, but nothing was changing. If anything, it was getting worse. That night, after school, Maya sat in her room staring at her reflection in the mirror. She couldn't help but think about the words that Chloe and her friends had called her. Charcoal. It stung even now. Maya ran her fingers through her hair, trying to imagine what it would be like to just fit in, to not be different. She thought about how easy it would be to just blend in, to be like everyone else. But no matter how much she tried, she knew it wasn't possible. She wasn't like the others, and maybe that was what made her a target. Her skin, her hair, her features, they set her apart in a way that made some people uncomfortable. And that discomfort, she realized, was the root of the cruelty. But as she sat there, her mind wandering back to those painful moments, something inside her began to shift. Maya had spent so much time thinking about how different she was from everyone else, but she had never stopped to think about what made her special. She had spent years hiding her true self, afraid of what others might think. But now, sitting alone in her room, she realized something. The very thing that made her different, the color of her skin, the texture of her hair, was what made her beautiful. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to embrace that. The next day at school, Maya walked into the building with a new sense of purpose. She had made a decision the night before. She wasn't going to let the bullies control her any longer. It was time to stand up for herself. She didn't know how or when, but she knew it had to happen. She couldn't keep hiding, couldn't keep allowing Chloe and her friends to dictate how she felt about herself. She would find her voice even if it took time. At lunch, when the usual group of bullies started making their way toward her table, Maya felt a surge of nervous energy. She could hear their footsteps behind her, the familiar sound of their voices growing louder with each step. Her heart began to race, but this time she didn't shrink away. Instead, she took a deep breath, gathered all the courage she had, and kept her head up. She wasn't going to let them see how much they still affected her, not today. As Chloe and her friends stood in front of her, ready to unleash their usual jabs, Maya surprised them. She looked directly at Chloe, making eye contact for the first time in weeks. The words she had prepared in her mind felt like they were rising up from deep inside her, and for a moment she felt like she was finally in control. "You know, Chloe," Maya began, her voice steady but firm, "you don't know anything about me. You don't know who I am or what I've been through. But I do know this. I'm tired of letting you make me feel small. Chloe and her friends paused, clearly taken aback by Maya's sudden confidence. For the first time, they didn't know what to say. They had been expecting the usual shy, silent Maya, the one who would sit quietly and let them have their fun. But this Maya was different. She wasn't shrinking back. She was standing tall, her words strong even if her hands trembled slightly. Maya didn't wait for a response. She wasn't interested in a back and forth with Chloe or anyone else. She knew that nothing they said would change her mind. I'm done with the jokes. I'm done being your target. You can call me whatever you want, but I'm not going to let it hurt me anymore. You see, I love the way I look. I love my skin. I love my hair. And I'm not going to let you make me feel bad about it. The words felt strange as they left her mouth, but they were true. For so long she had felt ashamed of the very things that made her who she was. But now, in this moment, Maya realized how powerful it could be to own her identity. She was done being the victim. She was done letting Chloe and her friends control how she felt about herself. And for the first time in a long while, Maya felt like she was standing in her own strength. Chloe and her friends stood there for a long moment, the silence between them thick with uncertainty. No one knew what to say. For the first time, Maya had turned the tables on them. She had taken control of the situation, and they didn't know how to react. Finally, Chloe broke the silence with a sarcastic laugh. Oh, wow. You really think that's going to change anything? She sneered. You're still the same old charcoal. But Maya didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled. A smile that was full of confidence, full of pride. Call me what you want, but I'm not afraid of you anymore. And that's all that matters. With that, Maya stood up, grabbed her tray, and walked away from the table. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She knew that her words had made an impact. Chloe and her friends might not have understood it yet, but Maya had finally found her voice. The next few days were strange. Chloe didn't approach Maya in the hallways or during lunch, and neither did her friends. They still made snide comments from time to time, but Maya didn't care. She didn't engage with them. Instead, she focused on herself. She spent more time with the friends who made her feel good about who she was, the ones who appreciated her for her personality and her strength, not her appearance. She spent time with teachers who encouraged her to pursue her passions, and she immersed herself in her studies, determined to succeed. As the days passed, Maya realized something important. The bullying didn't stop overnight, but it began to lose its power. Chloe and her friends couldn't get under her skin anymore, because Maya had learned to stand up for herself. The moment she had taken control, when she had decided to stop letting their words define her, was the moment everything started to change. Maya knew that this wasn't the end. She knew the road ahead would be difficult and that the bullying wouldn't just disappear. But now she had something more powerful than fear or insecurity, confidence. And with that, she knew she could handle anything that came her way. The days after Maya's confrontation with Chloe and her friends felt different, though not in the way she had imagined. The fear that had once gripped her heart whenever she walked through the hallways seemed to loosen, but it wasn't completely gone. Every now and then she would catch a glimpse of Chloe or one of her friends and their eyes would narrow, but there was no longer that same confidence in their glares. Maya wasn't sure if they were avoiding her because they were afraid of her newfound courage, or if they were just unsure how to respond to her standing up for herself. Either way, Maya noticed a shift in the way things were. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't easy, but she could feel the change, even if only a little. Maya continued to eat lunch in the same corner of the cafeteria, but this time, it wasn't out of fear. It was because she had made a choice. She no longer felt the need to sit in the shadows, but the silence of the corner allowed her to think, to breathe, and to process everything that had been happening. Some days, when she felt a bit braver, she would sit with a couple of friends who had always been kind to her. But for the most part, Maya chose solitude. It gave her the space she needed to focus on herself and her studies. But the peace didn't last long. A few days after her confrontation with Chloe, Maya found herself cornered again. It wasn't physical this time, but the words felt just as heavy. It happened during a group project in one of her classes. The teacher had assigned the class into pairs, and for reasons unknown to Maya, she ended up paired with none other than Chloe. At first, Maya considered asking the teacher for a change. But something inside her told her that this was an opportunity. A chance to show Chloe and everyone else that Maya was more than just the shy, quiet girl they had once seen as an easy target. So she took a deep breath and walked up to Chloe, trying to appear confident despite the nervousness swirling in her stomach. "Hey," Maya said, her voice steady but polite. "We've been assigned to work together for this project. Let's get started." Chloe looked at her with a raised eyebrow, clearly surprised by Maya's calm demeanor. For a moment there was silence between them, a kind of tension that Maya could almost touch. She could see the wheels turning in Chloe's head, as if she were deciding whether or not to keep up the act, to continue being the same person who had taunted her for so long. But Chloe didn't say anything at first. She just nodded, her lips curling into a tight, almost forced smile. As they worked together, Maya realized that Chloe wasn't nearly as confident as she had once appeared. Chloe had always been the center of attention, the one who seemed to know everything and had everyone's respect. But now Maya noticed Chloe was less sure of herself. She stumbled over her words and seemed almost uncomfortable around Maya. Every time Maya suggested an idea for their project, Chloe hesitated before agreeing, as if she weren't used to someone challenging her. For the first time, Maya saw Chloe not as the bully, but as someone who was just as insecure as everyone else. It was a strange feeling, realizing that the person who had once made her feel so small had her own weaknesses. But Maya wasn't about to get lost in that thought. She wasn't interested in making Chloe feel small. She didn't need to. Maya was focused on showing Chloe and everyone else that she could succeed on her own terms. By the end of the project, Maya had done most of the work. She didn't mind. She had always been the type to put in the effort when it came to school. But it felt different this time. As she handed in their project, Maya felt a sense of accomplishment. She hadn't let Chloe's taunts distract her. She hadn't let Chloe's presence intimidate her. In the end, Maya knew that the real victory wasn't just finishing the project, it was the fact that she had done it with strength and confidence. In spite of everything, when the results of the project came back, Maya was pleased to see that she had earned a high grade. But what was even more satisfying was that Chloe didn't seem to care much about the grade itself. Instead, she was more focused on Maya. "You did all the work, didn't you?" Chloe asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. But there was something different in her tone. It wasn't the confident sneer from before. This time it was almost unsure. Maya smiled, but not in a way that was meant to be rude. It was a smile that showed she knew the truth, and it was the truth that mattered. "We both contributed," Maya replied calmly. "But I'm glad we finished it." Chloe said nothing more. She simply walked away, her face a mix of irritation and confusion. Maya watched her go, and for the first time in a long while she felt a sense of peace. It wasn't because Chloe had been put in her place. It wasn't because Maya had won or anything like that. It was because, for the first time, Maya had faced the person who had tormented her and had walked away without being affected. That afternoon, Maya found herself reflecting on everything that had happened. She thought about the times she had felt alone, the moments when the bullying had felt like it was never going to end. She thought about how scared she had been, how she had tried so hard to hide from it all. But now, after everything, she realized that the real change hadn't come from the outside world. It had come from within. Maya had always tried to fit in, tried to be like everyone else. But that didn't work. It wasn't until she embraced who she truly was that things began to change. It wasn't about standing up to the bullies or trying to prove herself to anyone else. It was about standing up for herself, for her own self-worth. It was about finding strength in her own identity. The next few days were quieter. Chloe still made occasional comments, but they no longer had the same impact. Maya was no longer the girl who sat quietly, hoping the bullying would stop. She was the girl who spoke up, who stood tall, who was proud of who she was, and that made all the difference. Maya spent the rest of the week with a renewed sense of confidence. She continued to focus on her studies and spent more time with her friends. She no longer allowed herself to be dragged down by the words of others. She had learned that no one could define her except herself. As the school year went on, Maya's presence in the school began to change. She didn't hide in the corner anymore. She walked the halls with her head high, her shoulders back, and a smile on her face. She had found the courage to be herself, and that made her stronger than anything Chloe or anyone else could throw her way. And then one day, something unexpected happened. Chloe, of all people, came up to her between classes. For a moment, Maya wondered if it was another round of taunting. But when Chloe spoke, her voice was softer than usual.
"Hey," Chloe said, "I just wanted to say—"
"I'm sorry. I was wrong to treat you the way I did." Maya didn't know what to say at first. She had never expected an apology from Chloe. But when she looked at her, she saw something that hadn't been there before: vulnerability. Chloe wasn't the same girl who had once made Maya feel small. She was someone who had learned a lesson, someone who had realized that words could hurt. Maya smiled, not out of triumph, but out of understanding. "It's okay," she said quietly. "We all make mistakes. I'm just glad you see it now." And with that, Maya knew that her journey wasn't just about standing up to bullies. It was about teaching others, and herself, the power of kindness and self-respect. Because in the end, that was the true lesson. Life at school started to settle into a new rhythm for Maya. The weight that had once held her back, those sharp, hurtful words from Chloe and her friends, seemed to lift. It wasn't that the bullying had stopped completely, but Maya had found a way to stand firm, no longer letting it control her emotions. There were still moments when Chloe would make a snide remark, or one of her friends would try to push her buttons. But Maya had learned something important. Their words had no power over her unless she allowed them to. One afternoon, during a free period, Maya sat in the library, flipping through the pages of a book she'd been meaning to read for weeks. The quiet of the library was a welcome change from the noise of the school day, and Maya enjoyed the peace it brought. She was so immersed in her book that she didn't notice Chloe entering the library until she heard her voice. "You're here, of all places?" Chloe's tone was almost mocking, though it lacked the usual venom. Maya looked up, a little surprised. Chloe wasn't alone this time. She was with a few of her friends, but they weren't laughing, and there was no trace of the cruelty Maya had grown used to. Instead, there was something different in Chloe's eyes: uncertainty, maybe even a bit of curiosity. For a moment, Maya wondered if she should say anything. It wasn't like before, when Chloe would approach with a smile that hid the insult behind it. This time Chloe seemed almost unsure of herself. And Maya, despite everything, was still curious about this change. Instead of turning away, Maya put her book down and gave Chloe a brief smile, her voice steady. "Yeah, I like it here. It's quiet. You should try it sometime." Chloe stared at her for a moment, clearly taken aback by Maya's calm response. The rest of the group, though quiet, seemed to be watching intently, waiting for something. But instead of continuing with her usual teasing, Chloe's expression softened. "Look, Maya," she started, her words a little awkward. I just wanted to say that I'm sorry for how I treated you." Maya blinked, not sure if she had heard her correctly. Chloe apologizing? After everything that had happened, after months of bullying, this was the last thing Maya had expected. For a brief second, she wondered if she should just nod and walk away, as if it didn't matter. But something told her to listen, to give this moment a chance. "I don't know what I was thinking," Chloe continued, looking down for a moment before meeting Maya's gaze. "I've been thinking about it a lot lately, about how I made you feel and how wrong it was." Maya took a deep breath, her heart beating a little faster. She had spent so long wishing for an apology, hoping for this moment. But now that it was here, she wasn't sure what to say. Part of her wanted to tell Chloe everything she had been feeling, to share all the hurt and frustration that had built up over the months. But Maya also realized something important. This apology, though unexpected, was a sign that Chloe had changed. "You don't have to apologize," Maya said quietly, her voice soft but firm. "I don't need you to make up for anything. But I appreciate you saying it." Chloe looked at her, eyes wide. She seemed unsure, as if she didn't know what to make of Maya's calm response. I guess I didn't realize how much my words were hurting you," Chloe admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know why I did it. It was stupid," Maya nodded. "We all do stupid things sometimes. But it's what you do after that counts. And I think you're trying to make things right." For the first time, Chloe smiled, genuinely. It was a small smile, but it was a real one. "Yeah, I guess I am," she said. Then, as if to break the tension, she added, "You're not so bad after all, Maya." Maya chuckled softly. "I never was." The group, still quiet, seemed to take in the exchange. No one spoke immediately, but Maya could feel the shift in the air. What had once been a space filled with tension and uncertainty was now filled with something different: understanding. maybe even a hint of respect. Chloe and her friends didn't leave immediately. Instead, they sat down at a nearby table, and for the first time in a long while, Maya didn't feel like she had to retreat into herself. She stayed in the library, finishing her book, but her mind wandered. She thought about how far she had come, how much strength she had found within herself, and she thought about how strange it was that in the end, the one person who had made her feel so small was the one who was trying to make things right. The following weeks were filled with more subtle shifts. Chloe and her friends no longer made fun of Maya. They didn't go out of their way to be her friends, but they stopped the taunting, and that was enough for Maya. It was the first real sign that things were changing, not just for Maya, but for everyone. Even the students who had stood by and watched the bullying happen began to act differently. Some of them started talking to Maya more, and for the first time, Maya felt like she was truly seen, not for the color of her skin or the way she looked, but for who she was. But despite everything, Maya wasn't naive. She knew that change wasn't instant. It wasn't a one-time event that made everything better. It was something that happened slowly over time with consistent effort. It was about people changing, not just for her, but for themselves. She had learned that it was up to each person to decide how they wanted to treat others. And sometimes, it took a little longer for some people to realize that kindness was more powerful than cruelty. One afternoon, Maya found herself walking through the hallways when she noticed a girl in her grade standing alone by the lockers, looking upset. Maya recognized her, though they hadn't spoken much before. The girl had always seemed quiet, like she was holding something in, and Maya had often wondered if she was going through something similar to what Maya had faced. Without thinking, Maya walked over to her. "Hey," Maya said, offering a small smile. "Are you okay?" The girl looked up, startled, as if she hadn't expected anyone to notice her. "Oh, yeah, I'm fine, just stuff." She hesitated, looking down at her shoes. Maya stood there for a moment, considering how she should respond. "You know," Maya said, "I've been there. I used to feel like I didn't belong either. But then I realized that I wasn't the problem. The problem was how I let other people's opinions affect me. And you don't have to let that happen. You're not alone in this." The girl blinked, clearly surprised by Maya's words. You went through that too?" Maya nodded. "Yeah, I did. And if I can get through it, so can you. You're stronger than you think." The girl smiled just a little. "Thanks, I didn't know anyone cared." "I do," Maya said. "And I'm here if you ever need someone to talk to." As Maya walked away, she realized something. Standing up to the bullies had been an important part of her journey, but helping others who were going through the same thing was just as important. Maya had found her voice, and now she was using it to help others find theirs. She had learned that kindness was a choice, and that the strength to stand up for yourself could inspire others to do the same. The change that Maya had hoped for wasn't just about stopping the bullying. It was about creating a ripple effect of kindness. She had faced her fears, stood up for herself, and now she was able to help others do the same. Maya had learned that sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply show up and be there for someone who needs it. As the weeks passed, Maya's life continued to evolve. It was hard to ignore the changes that were taking place, both in her school and within herself. The girl who had once walked the halls with her head down, avoiding the cruel words and glares, was now walking tall, her confidence growing with every passing day. Maya had learned that standing up for herself wasn't just about confronting the bullies. It was about finding strength in who she was and teaching others to do the same. Chloe, who had once been the source of so much pain, was no longer a threat. The apology she had given Maya had been genuine, and though it wasn't enough to undo the damage done, it had been a step in the right direction. Chloe, like everyone else, was on her own journey of self-discovery. And while their relationship wasn't perfect, it was no longer built on the foundation of cruelty and fear. The other students in the school also seemed to change, though not as quickly. Maya noticed that more and more people were starting to speak up when they saw bullying or heard harmful words. The silence that had once surrounded the cruelty had begun to break piece by piece. Maya had heard from her friends that some of the quieter students, ones who had always been overlooked, were beginning to find their voices too. They were standing up for themselves, standing up for each other. And while Maya didn't take credit for it, she knew that her own actions had been a part of that change. One afternoon, as Maya walked out of class and headed to her locker, She noticed a group of girls standing by the hallway laughing and talking. They were the same girls who had once been part of Chloe's circle, the ones who had joined in with the taunts and insults. Maya had avoided them for weeks, not wanting to engage with anyone who had been part of the bullying, but something in her changed that day. Instead of walking past them, she decided to stop. "Hey," Maya said, her voice calm but firm. "I just wanted to say something." The girls turned, a little surprised by her sudden approach. They had been the ones who used to laugh at Maya, used to make fun of her, and now here she was, standing in front of them without flinching. "I know things haven't always been easy between us," Maya continued, her eyes meeting theirs. "But I'm not angry anymore. I just want to move forward. We all have the power to be better, to treat each other with kindness. So I hope that we can all do that from now on." The girls stood still for a moment, as if unsure of how to respond. Maya wasn't asking for an apology. She wasn't looking for anyone to admit they were wrong. All she wanted was for them to see her as more than the girl they had once bullied, to see her as someone who was strong, someone who deserved respect. And for a moment, that message seemed to sink in. One of the girls, the one who had often been the loudest in their group, looked at Maya with a mix of uncertainty and recognition. "You're right," she said quietly. "We were really mean to you." Maya nodded, not needing to say anything more. It was enough that they were acknowledging the past and making an effort to do better. "It's okay," Maya said with a soft smile. "We all make mistakes. The important thing is that we learn from them." With that, Maya turned and walked away, her heart light. It wasn't about getting revenge or proving that she was right. It was about breaking the cycle, about showing others that it was possible to move forward even after everything had happened. Maya realized that sometimes the best way to heal was to extend an olive branch, to give others the chance to grow just as she had. Later that week, Maya found herself sitting in the cafeteria, talking with a group of friends she had made over the course of the year. They were a mix of students from different backgrounds, some who had been friends with her from the start and others who had only recently gotten to know her. It was the first time Maya had felt completely at ease, surrounded by people who accepted her for who she was. It was the first time she realized how much she had grown, not just in terms of how she saw herself, but how others saw her too. "You know, Maya," one of her friends said, "I don't think I've ever seen you so confident before. You've really come a long way." Maya smiled, her thoughts drifting back to the days when she had first entered the school, unsure of herself, feeling like an outsider. "I guess it just takes time," she said, "and learning to trust myself." Her friend nodded as if she understood completely. "It's amazing what happens when you stop letting other people define you." Maya didn't need to say anything more. They both knew that this wasn't just about the bullying anymore. It was about taking control of her life and not letting anyone's opinion, no matter how cruel, dictate her worth. Maya had learned that her strength came from within, and no one could take that away from her. As the school year drew to a close, Maya found herself reflecting on everything that had happened. She thought about how much had changed in such a short time, how she had gone from feeling invisible to feeling like she had a voice, a purpose. She had faced her fears, stood up for herself, and learned to embrace who she was. But more than anything, Maya realized that the journey she had been on wasn't just about her. It was about the people around her, the ones who had been hurtful in the past and the ones who had supported her through it all. It was about creating a community where kindness, respect, and understanding were the foundation. On the last day of school, Maya stood in the hallway, her backpack slung over one shoulder, surrounded by friends. It was a bittersweet moment, because while she was excited for the summer, she knew that this chapter was coming to an end. She looked around at the familiar faces, at the classmates who had watched her grow, and she felt a sense of peace. She wasn't the same person who had walked into that school months ago, afraid and uncertain. She was stronger now. She had learned that the power to change her life had always been in her hands. It wasn't about waiting for others to change. It was about changing herself, about finding her own voice and standing up for who she was. As she walked out of the school building, Maya glanced over her shoulder one last time. The hallways, once filled with whispers and cruel words, now seemed full of possibilities. She had taken the first step toward becoming the person she had always wanted to be, and that was only the beginning. Maya didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. No matter what came her way, she would always stand tall, She had found her strength, and that was a lesson she would carry with her for the rest of her life.